Camping was supposed to be an escape, a chance to breathe fresh air, roast marshmallows, and forget about work for a while. That's what I told myself when my friends roped me into spending a weekend in a remote national park, the kind of place where cell service was a myth and the nearest town was an hour away by dirt road. It sounded perfect in theory. We arrived mid-afternoon and picked a spot near the base of a hill. It was beautiful, I'll give it that. Towering pines surrounded us, and through a gap in the trees, you could see the faint outline of an old fire lookout tower perched at the top of the hill. It was abandoned now, of course, a relic from decades ago when rangers used to live up there and scan the horizon for smoke. Chris, our self-appointed trip leader, thought it was the coolest thing ever and immediately decided we'd hike up to it in the morning. By the time we got the tent set up and the fire roaring, the sun was sinking below the horizon. The woods felt different in the dark, more alive somehow. The crackle of the fire was comforting, but beyond its light, shadows shifted in ways that made my skin crawl. "All right, guys," Chris said, holding up a small, weathered Ranger radio he'd bought off eBay. "I brought this for the vibes. Thought it'd be fun to see if it picks up anything cool out here." "Like what?" Jess asked, rolling her eyes. "I don't know. Ranger chatter, maybe? Or ghost signals," Chris said with a grin, wiggling his fingers theatrically. "Ghost signals," Jess repeated deadpan. "Great. We're doomed." Chris fiddled with the dials, and the radio crackled to life, spitting static and occasional blips of sound. He left it on a random channel and propped it on a rock near the fire. For a while, it was just background noise as we laughed, told stories, and passed around a bottle of cheap whiskey. And then it spoke. "Leave now." The voice was distorted, robotic, like an old recording. We all froze, staring at the radio as static filled the silence. "Did it just—" Jess started, but Chris cut her off. "It's probably interference," he said quickly, though his face had gone pale. "Old equipment like this picks up weird stuff all the time." "Chris, this thing's been dead air for an hour," I said. "That wasn't random static." Before anyone could respond, the voice came again, louder this time. "Leave now. Danger ahead." We sat there in stunned silence, the fire crackling between us. I glanced at the others. Jess looked terrified. Chris was trying to act calm, but failing miserably. And then there was me, sitting there with a growing pit in my stomach. "Okay, that's creepy as hell," Jess said, standing up. "Turn it off, Chris." Chris reached for the radio, but before he could, the voice came a third time. "You're not alone." The fire popped loudly, making us all jump. Chris grabbed the radio and shut it off, plunging us into silence. The woods around us suddenly felt oppressive, like they were closing in. "Maybe it's a prank," Chris said weakly. "From who?" Jess snapped. "There's no one out here but us." We argued for a while about what to do. Jess wanted to leave immediately, but Chris insisted we'd be fine. Eventually, we agreed to stay until morning, but I'd be lying if I said I slept at all that night. Every noise outside the tent made my heart race, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The next morning, we hiked up to the fire tower. Chris was determined to prove there was nothing to be afraid of, though I'm not sure who he was trying to convince, us or himself. The climb was brutal, the trail overgrown and littered with fallen branches. When we finally reached the top, the tower loomed over us, weathered and decrepit. "See, just an old tower," Chris said, forcing a laugh. But as we approached, we noticed something strange. The door to the tower was open, creaking slightly in the wind. "I thought you said this place was abandoned," Jess said, her voice shaking. "It is," Chris replied, though he didn't sound convinced. We climbed the stairs, each step groaning under our weight. At the top, We found a small room with dusty windows and a rusted desk. On the desk was a logbook, its pages yellowed with age. Chris flipped it open, and we all leaned in to read. The entries were normal at first, detailing weather conditions and fire sightings. But then they turned strange. July 12th, 1973. Heard voices on the radio. Thought it was interference, but the message was clear. Leave now. July 13th, 1973. Saw figures in the woods. They're getting closer. July 14th, 1973. If you find this, it's already too late. The last entry was scrawled so violently the pen had torn through the paper. We stared at it in silence, the weight of the words sinking in. And then we heard it, a voice crackling over Chris's radio, which he'd clipped to his belt. You're not alone. We bolted. The climb down the tower was a blur, branches slapping at our faces as we ran back to camp. But when we got there, our tents were gone. The fire pit was cold, like no one had been there for weeks. And then, from somewhere deep in the woods, we heard laughter, low, guttural, and inhuman. We never stopped running. I don't know how we made it back to the car, but when we did, I swear I saw figures standing at the edge of the tree line, watching us. We didn't look back. There's something about being deep in the woods that strips away the illusions of safety. Out there, it's just you, the trees, and whatever might be lurking between them. I didn't think much about that when I joined my friends for a weekend camping trip. We were young, restless, and eager to escape the monotony of city life. The idea of exploring a lesser-known trail that Mike had read about online felt like the perfect adventure. It's supposed to lead to this old, abandoned campsite, Mike said as we drove deeper into the wilderness. Hardly anyone goes there anymore. It'll be just us and nature. Why is it abandoned? I asked, half joking. I don't know, he replied with a shrug. Budget cuts, probably. The site's been off the map for years. The trailhead wasn't marked, and we had to park on the side of a gravel road before trekking through dense forest. It was late afternoon by the time we arrived at the campsite, and I'll admit, it was picturesque. A clearing nestled between towering pines, with fire pit in the center and an old wooden sign leaning against a tree that read Camp Whispering Pines. The name gave me chills for some reason. This is perfect, Natalie said, dropping her backpack and stretching. It's like something out of a movie. We set up our tents, gathered wood for a fire, and settled in for the night. The first few hours were exactly what you'd expect. S'mores, ghost stories, and laughter echoing into the dark. But as the fire burned low and the conversation died down, an uneasy silence crept over the campsite. Do you guys hear that? Natalie asked suddenly. We paused, straining our ears. At first, I thought she was imagining things. But then I heard it, a faint rustling sound, like footsteps coming from the woods. Probably an animal, Mike said, tossing another log on the fire. Relax. But the sound didn't stop. It circled the campsite, moving in slow, deliberate patterns. My heart started to race. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the trees, but the beam only illuminated empty forest. Hello, I called out, my voice shaking. No response. The rustling stopped. For a moment, everything was still, and I almost convinced myself it was nothing. Then, from somewhere deep in the woods, we heard laughter. Faint, distant, but unmistakably human. Okay, that's not an animal, Natalie said, her voice trembling. Mike stood up, trying to look brave. Maybe it's other hikers messing with us. At this hour? I shot back. Who hikes at midnight? We argued for a while about what to do. Mike wanted to stay, insisting it was just our imaginations playing tricks. Natalie and I weren't so sure. We eventually agreed to wait it out. After all, we had a fire and strength in numbers. What could really happen? Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of something tapping against my tent. It was rhythmic, deliberate. My first thought was that it was a branch swaying in the wind, but there was no breeze. I held my breath, listening as the tapping moved around the tent, circling it. Then it stopped, and I heard the zipper of Natalie's tent being pulled open. "Natalie," I whispered, unzipping my own tent and peeking out. Her tent flap was open, but she wasn't inside. I crawled out, my flashlight trembling in my hand. "Mike," I hissed, moving toward his tent. "Wake up." When I reached his tent, it was empty too. Panic set in as I shone my flashlight around the campsite. The fire was out, and the clearing was eerily quiet. "Natalie?" "Mike," I called, my voice echoing into the woods. No answer. And then I saw it. Footprints in the dirt, leading away from the campsite. They weren't ours. The prints were too large, too deep, and they led into the forest. Against my better judgment, I followed them. The tracks led me to a small clearing about 50 yards from camp. In the center of the clearing was a single, weathered tent. It looked ancient, the fabric faded and torn. My flashlight beam flickered as I approached, and I noticed the ground around the tent was littered with bones. Small ones, like they'd come from rabbits or squirrels. But there were larger ones too. I called out again, but the words caught in my throat. From inside the tent, I heard breathing. Slow, heavy, and not human. I stumbled back, tripping over a root, and as I scrambled to my feet, the tent flap moved. A hand emerged, pale, thin, with long, gnarled fingers. I ran. I don't remember much about the sprint back to the campsite, only that when I got there, everything was gone. The tents, the fire pit, even the wooden sign. It was like we had never been there. I kept running until I reached the car, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself think. Natalie and Mike were already there, their faces pale and eyes wide. "What happened?" I demanded. "We don't know," Natalie whispered. "We woke up in the woods. Something was following us." Mike started the car, and we sped off without looking back. None of us spoke on the drive home, and we've never talked about it since. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that campsite, about the laughter in the woods and the hand emerging from the tent. And I wonder if Camp Whispering Pines was ever supposed to be found. The mountains were supposed to be an escape. That was the idea when I packed my gear, loaded my car, and headed for a week-long solo hike. I needed to clear my head, leave the noise of the city behind, and just breathe. The trail I chose wasn't popular, a long, winding path through dense forests and over rocky ridges. It was perfect. The first day was uneventful. Just me, the crunch of my boots on the dirt trail, and the occasional chirp of birds. By the time I set up camp, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting everything in warm, golden light. I cooked dinner over a small camp stove, read a bit from the book I'd brought, and fell asleep to the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed and eager to tackle the day's hike. But as I packed up my tent, I noticed something odd. Footprints. They weren't mine. The tracks were fresh, leading from the trees to the edge of my campsite, and then disappearing back into the woods. I told myself it was probably another hiker passing by. Maybe they'd seen my fire and checked to make sure I was okay. It was unsettling, but not enough to make me turn back. I pressed on, the trail growing steeper as I climbed higher into the mountains. The air grew colder, and the trees thinned out, giving way to rocky terrain. Around midday, I stopped to rest and eat. That's when I saw him for the first time. He was standing on the trail about 50 yards ahead, his back to me. He wore a faded green jacket and a wide-brimmed hat. and he was completely still, like he was waiting for something. I called out, "Hello. Beautiful day, huh?" He didn't respond, didn't turn around, just stood there. I felt a prickle of unease, but brushed it off. Maybe he hadn't heard me. I packed up my stuff and started walking toward him, but when I looked up again, he was gone. The trail ahead was empty. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made my heart pound. I kept my flashlight close and my fire burning brighter than usual. Around midnight, I thought I heard footsteps circling my camp. I called out, but no one answered. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell into a restless sleep. The third day, I reached the highest point of the trail, a narrow ridge with breathtaking views of the valley below. But I couldn't enjoy it. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the man in the green jacket. I didn't, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was close. As I descended into the valley, I found something that stopped me cold. A campsite. It looked old, abandoned. The tent was collapsed, its fabric tattered and faded. A rusted camp stove sat next to a pile of empty cans. But what caught my attention was the journal lying half buried in the dirt. I picked it up, brushing off the dirt and leaves. The entries were sporadic, the handwriting messy and uneven. The last entry sent a chill down my spine. He's following me. I see him in the trees, always watching. I don't think I'll make it out. I closed the journal and stuffed it into my pack, my hands trembling. Suddenly, the solitude of the trail felt oppressive, the silence deafening. I decided to cut my trip short and head back the way I'd come. The hike back was a blur of anxiety. I barely stopped to eat or rest, driven by an overwhelming need to get out of those woods. But no matter how fast I moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I started noticing signs. A broken branch here, a scuff in the dirt there. Someone was following me. On the fifth day, as I neared the trailhead, I heard it, footsteps. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the gloom, and there he was, the man in the green jacket. He was closer now, maybe 20 feet away. His face was shadowed by his hat, but I could feel his gaze locked on me. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking. He didn't answer. Instead, he raised a hand and pointed at me. Then, without a sound, he turned and walked into the trees. I didn't wait to see where he went. I ran. When I finally reached my car, I threw my gear into the back seat and peeled out of there, gravel spraying under my tires. It wasn't until I was miles away, back on paved roads, that I let myself breathe. I pulled over at a gas station and took out the journal, flipping to the last page. There, beneath the final entry, was something I hadn't noticed before. A sketch. It was crude but unmistakable. A man in a green jacket and a wide-brimmed hat, standing on a trail, and beneath it, scrawled in shaky letters, "If you see him, don't let him follow you." I've thought about that trip a lot since then, about the man in the green jacket and the abandoned campsite. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but one thing is certain. I'll never hike that trail again.